Cinco de Mayo to all. Thanks for coming.
Hey.
Fun event today. So I'd like to kick off by just calling to order the meeting of the Economic Development Commission of May 5th. Thanks for joining. Quick meeting following up on our last one. So probably not quite as much time as we're typically used to, but I think we've got a little more airtime for some of the topics we've got later on in the agenda. But first, I will ask for a review of the minutes from the April 14th meeting that we had that Sean circulated. So if anyone has any questions, comments, or corrections, we welcome those. Otherwise, entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second?
Have a second. Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Any opposed?
See that? Did I do it right?
Thanks. Great. Thanks, everybody. So for our standing updates, the first we've got on this month's agenda is the EDC ordinance. So after our meeting, Tom had made a couple of minor clarifying edits, and we have that. And the plan at this point, I believe, is to submit to council for consideration on the 15th. Got to submit in memo form next week for that, and then it will be at the council's discretion as to where they take it from there to either legal or governance or both. So got some actionable time frame on that. And next we've got our data working group. Jacob and I did not have a chance to meet after our last month's meeting, so not much to update there, but maybe some concrete follow-up depending on the conversation later on outdoor dining. And then our land use liaisons. You guys are up next if either of you wants to kick us off.
Take the first bite of the apple.
Did you say land use? Land use, okay.
We meet in about an hour and a half.
Yeah, right. I don't know if there's any update from the last time or not.
No,
I don't think there is.
no.
Did we meet between the last
I don't think we.
EDC and now?
I don't think we met last month.
No.
But the ADUs did go through. There was some back and forth in council, but that got all worked out, and so those have moved on. We did third reading, correct?
We did.
We did second and third reading, so those changes have gone through, so we're excited to see from the land use board. It was a pretty long process and a lot of compromises once we got to planning board, so we're relatively happy with kind of what was submitted to see how that works through. And then we are waiting for a report back for the guidebook. Howard, our housing navigator, is working on the guidebook for that. We hope to build more guidebooks that essentially help people get through certain processes. And then we, after this, our next meeting, literally right after this one, we should be discussing some of the city-owned properties, and we're still working on that assessment.
Right, that and character district incentives.
Yes, that's a big.
So, I don't know, the commission got the list of the city-owned properties last month, I believe. Sent it up. So I don't know if there's any input or comment from this commission about those properties.
Anything anyone feels we left off or missed?
One comment going through the list, just that so many of them, to me, seem completely undevelopable.
Yeah.
If
A
they
lot of
could
wetlands.
somehow be tagged or say 90% wetland or,
That's what they're doing now.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what staff is doing.
Good sort.
right?
Yeah.
I think it was like 219 was the
Yeah.
total. And
The original master list was kind of with descriptions in it. I'm not sure
Yes.
how it's
Right.
kind of gotten,
Yeah.
as
Yeah,
it's
and
gotten
some were
transferred.
highlighted to a certain degree, so.
Yeah, I think it came down to like 7 to 10 possible buildable sites
Yeah.
that need to be. Yeah,
Yeah, it's not a lot.
It's not a lot. I think our big thing that we're trying to make sure that we highlight too, because I think there's a misconception around the community, is community campus and the very limited amount of buildable space there.
Yeah.
Can I give an update on that?
Please do.
Yes.
Our staff took on the assignment of doing the wetlands delineation survey because we don't have one that is of any recent vintage. So It was a combination of some planning people, some conservation people, and we have a horticulturist, Earl Chase, who helped. So that data is coming back to me next week, and then we'll understand how we can message what is buildable, and then what can go there. So.
Yeah, well, that's helpful because we get so many questions about every meeting. Well, you know, what about community campus? And how come we're not doing that? Like, everything should go there, you know? So.
It's a save-all.
Anyway, we'll defer to you.
Yeah.
I think the information will be helpful for everybody to have.
Yeah.
Close.
And are there other properties that are being surveyed for wetlands as part of this, given how wet most of the remaining ones probably are?
Not at the moment. Not at the moment. Not unless
No.
land use or another governing body says, have you looked at this, and have you looked at it recently, and if not, could you?
Yeah, I think after this go-around, we sort of highlight the maybe 7 to 10 potential properties, then dig a little deeper with engineering and that kind of thing. So,
And as Robert had touched on, we are really going to be cracking in, like, taking a deep look at incentives for the CD 4 and 5 districts, and then the overlays. And Nick Cracknell is doing a really, in the planning department, is doing a really great job, really spearheading that, obviously, in the the minutiae work, but of trying to figure out how we can, as he says it, figure out the carrot-stick ratio of the dangling to try to figure out how we can increase workforce housing and/or better community space trade-off for developers. So that's kind of the next big dive.
I thought he did a great job on that McIntyre conversation when he
Yeah.
explained the options available to the city to get a better result.
I agree.
In CD4 and CD5, can I just ask which zones are those? Just to kind of, is that gateway districts primarily, or?
no, it's
No, it's
downtown.
downtown.
And to put it in context, the
Eric, this-
McIntyre parcel is bifurcated. Part of it's in CD4 and parts in CD5,
Right, and Gateway starts with
just to make it that much
Route
more
1
interesting.
bypass, maybe? Was,
Not exactly sure where it starts, but yeah.
yeah,
And then you have some of the overlays.
right.
What was the impediment to the ADU system? You know, you talked about when you have to go back in and get some adjustments because it hasn't been terribly
Yeah,
well used.
So part of the process we did was talk to the people who had applied and not built, applied and built, architectures, and builders. And, you know, so my opinion in the land use is we wanted to make it as easy as possible. We had discussed the options of pre-selected designs that would be, you know, by right in certain areas. I believe that there were some members of the planning board who didn't love the idea of it by right. There was certain parking requirements, character-based and things like that. So I would say Councillor Beth Monroe has a little bit better understanding of what exactly was detailed changed because she did it on the planning board. And then there were a few councillors who felt that some of the recommendations that came out after planning board still were not conducive enough to make it an easier process. I'm of the mindset that I don't believe ADUs are a catch-all for everyone. They're an expensive modification to your home or to build. But to me, they really work in the sense of a generational housing. So having a place for potentially your kids to age into or your parents to age out of. So I think we got to a good place, and we'll see, I think, you know, in a year or so, if we get a couple more applicants. I really personally think that the costing of it is more of a deterrent
That's the real
than.
hindrance, yeah.
I think the intent was to see more ADUs as an option, another tool in the toolkit. And of the 37 permanent, only 15 have been built.
Right.
So the idea is if we can up that,
We were getting feedback that people felt that they were spending 10,000 plus just on lawyers to get through the permitting and zoning process. So trying to make them a certain size by right on a lot size
Right.
is really, for me, the goal.
Just one other item on this that we touched on but didn't really discuss in great length was maybe some incentives for people who have, let's say, 4 to, 20-unit buildings, or higher, but incentives for when those are sold to remain or become part of an affordable housing supply, as opposed to a developer coming in, buying a 6-unit property, turning it into $1 million condos and selling them off. So I don't know what those are, but I think that's something to think about, if there's some kind of mechanism that can be put into place so that that can be taken advantage of by a buyer to keep those units affordable.
Dover's been pretty successful in their pilot program, which is payment in lieu of taxes,
Yeah.
and keeping that, because we have something, Mr. Welch will, I think, wring my neck if I quote this wrong, but we have something of like 200 to 400 apartments right now that are HUD tax credited that potentially, well, almost guaranteed that will be coming off the market as affordable.
Right. I know Nick touched on that.
Yeah, units that will be coming off, like the apartment complex behind, they've now changed the name, it used to be Winchester, behind the high school, and some units like that. And so looking at, Dover has, I believe, their program is 5 to 10 units that they really kind of target at, so people who own, local residents who usually own multifamilies. So we're going to kind of be diving into that a little bit at the Land Use Committee to see if that's something that would work for us to try to incentivize those people to keep those, because we know that, when they're not giant developer owned, they tend to be more reasonably priced.
Ann?
Joe, back on the spreadsheet of where you're looking for buildable land, is that specific to affordable housing, or are you looking for other uses
It's-
as well?
I would say it started as affordable housing, but now, especially with the rec study needs and kind of community input that will be, kind of coming out of that, we know that there's other needs. It really started with the request from, I wouldn't say really, it was highlighted based on the request out of Panaway Manor with the redevelopment project at Sherburne School. There was a lot of questions of why here. And so, we were asked by the neighborhood to essentially defend our potential decision, which is totally understandable. And so part of that is assessing those properties.
Tom, you had a question?
Yeah, I wonder, so when I think, and most people think of ADUs, they think of adding on an addition, so to speak, on an existing property. Did the Land Use Committee talk how the ADU ordinance could be used to allow for new construction of like a 2-unit? Instead of building onto an existing house, if, you'd get the benefits of an EDU. If you were building a duplex, for instance, you wouldn't be subject to the same requirements that you might if you had to have a 2-unit structure, or in certain districts don't allow duplexes. I'm just wondering.
That would be, I would say, more of a Nick question. But as far as I understand, no, the ADUs based on, I believe, in their size limitations. So I don't believe we went that far. I know there has been discussion of upzoning, which there's there's a bill right now, I believe, that was from the Senate and heading into the House that would allow for upzoning. So if you were in single family, it would automatically put you up into, if you were in a 4-unit, you'd be by right able to build larger. So I don't believe the conversation of how ADUs would affect duplexes was brought into the equation.
Yeah, I'm not focused just on a duplex, I'm focused on a new construction altogether.
Yeah.
I'm just, if you're going to allow people to add on an ADU, even though it's a smaller than the main
If you're
structure.
building new, I guess you could just design your house so that you could carve off a piece to be the ADU.
Well, yes, but the ADUs have lesser requirements than a new 2-unit
Right.
construction. So I'm wondering if there's a way of getting the benefits of the, relaxed requirements of ADUs into new construction. Because it seems to me if you're building a house and there's an opportunity to add a second unit, it's not going to be, you're going to be able to spread that cost out that you can't right now when someone's putting an ADU on their house and has to spend $10,000 for legal fees or something. I just wondering if apparently it wasn't a conversation that took place, but I wonder if that might be the next step in terms of increasing the, housing stock in the city.
Please, if I say something that's out of line, please let me know. I don't believe the ordinance separates new construction versus adaptation of homes. I believe that if you're building something new and it can fall underneath the ordinance with the planning department, then you'd be able to do something like that. I don't believe it segregates the two, but I could be incorrect.
Might be worth an update from Nick at some point.
Yeah.
I think we'll also, sorry, Mr. Chairman, we can also make sure that's clear in the housing handbook that Howard's putting together, so that people are not left with those kind of questions.
It's a great one. And the comment on upzoning, I mean, Nick talked about that when he was here, seeing a lot of that happening where lots were existing ranches or single-family lots were being further subdivided or built on. So whether that's not subdividing and creating more inventory, if there's a way to explore that, or as part of other zoning revisions, that may be, certainly seems like a worthy conversation.
Absolutely.
Great. Good update. So next, we've got Ben from the Collaborative.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Just a few updates from me. Thank you, Bob. Our Restaurant Week wrapped up this past weekend. We won't have actual data. What we do is we can have the restaurants compare their sales 2 weeks prior to the weeks of Restaurant Week and the 2 weeks after. So we kind of have to wait 2 weeks, then ask for the data. It's pulling teeth to get the data, so it takes like a month for us to have like true data. But anecdotally, I've heard nothing but good things from the restaurant community that participated in Restaurant Week. So another strong success hopefully there, and hopefully the data will show that. A couple quick things just coming up. Next week is Hit the Decks. Next Thursday, the 11th, is Hit the Decks. So hopefully you can come out and join the celebration of our return to summer. Following week is on the 18th. We're hosting the State of the City, featuring City Manager Karen Kennard and Mayor McEachern. That is normally a morning event. We're switching it up. We're trying an evening event, early afternoon event. So that's a 4 o'clock start at 3:45. Get there 4 o'clock start, and then and that'll be at the Players Ring. So kind of mixing it up, new venue, trying new things there. So come join us for that. There's no cost to attend that event, and everyone's welcome. And a nice update from our leadership. I know I've mentioned before that we've been partnering with the EDC and SBA on an event on June 6th. That's coming together. I think we've entitled it The Secret Sauce of Small Business Success in Portsmouth. We're going to be featuring Jonathan Day from Centris Digital, Kevin Dwyer from Dwyer's Pub, and Suzanne Foley from Port City Pretzels that morning, along with a panel discussion of some resources from the SBDC, SBA, SCORE, and others. So that'll be another great event, free and open to anyone in the community. That'll be the morning of the 6th at 3S Art Space. And thank you, Sean, for your help with that.
Yep.
I had mentioned last month that the Street Life event 400 celebration is on August 15th. The capacity for that event on Congress Street is 700, and we have sold out. So we are really delighted about that. We're working really hard now to maybe increase the capacity for that event, and we think we can maybe add another 150 people without too many more logistical challenges. So we're hopefully going to have the ability to announce that here in the next little bit. So without really much marketing, I will say there was a tremendous amount of interest in that event, and it's pretty much at capacity. In fact, I looked last night, I think we have 40-something people on a wait list already. So it's been incredible. I know there's a public policy, sort of legislative update coming later, but we are still working very much in that space, focused a lot on the housing legislation. It seems to be moving forward in a very positive way at the state and being kind of tied into the budget. It's kind of the safest place for it right now. Medicaid expansion also is in a very good place, and we're excited about that. There is some kind of funky legislation out there trying to, I think has good intent. I think legislation is to require employers to pay out any unused vacation time. New Hampshire doesn't do that right now. And it's not that we are opposed to that concept. The legislation is very vague and doesn't really account for, a company that may not have vacation and sick time and just have personal time, or companies that don't track that sort of thing and sort of take what you need. And, there's a lot of modern companies that are doing that. So there's just too many loopholes in that legislation. So we're kind of looking at that too. Just two other quick updates. Membership, and I always kind of use that as a little bit of a gauge of how healthy our business community is doing, is up year over year by about 70 members. So we're seeing a lot of interest, and I think that speaks well to having a healthy and vibrant business community here in Portsmouth. And then lastly, we are finally started. Yesterday we sent out a survey to our membership and the business community, asking them to weigh in our next strategic plan that is kicking off right now. That process is underway right now. So this is sort of that research, kind of see where we're at, see what the needs and wants are from the business community phase, and then we will put our heads together later in June and talk about where we go from here. So pretty exciting stuff for us. We're excited to take on that effort and set forth the next vision for us as an organization. Been doing it for 105 years, I think, now. So it's always good to kind of keep focused and focus on what's next. So that's my update. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
I just have a quick question on the membership increase. Are you seeing that kind of existing businesses becoming members because things are more active, or new business creation?
A little bit of both. We are intentionally making some efforts into some outreach in Kittery as well. I think we can all kind of recognize that we're sort of one economy, despite the imaginary line in the middle of the river. We're one economy, so we're reaching out to some Kittery folks, and that's bearing some fruit for us. But yes, we're seeing some new businesses join right away. We're seeing a little bit more interest from the retail community. And then just some existing businesses that, quite frankly, we didn't know existed. There's always shocked that there's businesses in the community that have been here for years that just, maybe they don't have a retail presence or not, just an office space here. And we've come into contact with a couple of those too, which is very cool.
It's going to hear.
Yes.
Do you hear about the worker shortage? Is it better? Is it stabilizing? Is it still in crisis?
It's very much still in crisis. A good example of that I would point out is we've been focusing, and we're working very closely right now with the United Way on some childcare initiatives, and really focused on what is the business community's role in that, because quite frankly I think they need to be part of the solution, because there's a lot of people that can't go to work right now because they can't find a place for their kids to go, or they can't afford to do it because it's so costly for their kids to be in childcare. So we've been working with them, and as an example, Great Bay Kids Company is closing their shop in Newmarket and trying to move all those kids to their Pease location, which is great that those families have a place to go. But if you live in Newmarket and maybe you work in Epping, Pease is not on the way, so it creates a lot of challenges. So that definitely is still existing. It is a big problem, and it's particularly bad in child care and health care, and I think a lot of the restaurants and retail are getting used to doing less with more, but those industries that are regulated, for every X number of patients or X number of kids, you have to have a certified staff member. They don't have the flexibility of a lot of other businesses, so they are particularly challenged in that way. So yes, very much so. That's not gone away yet.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Sean, you're up next.
Sure. If I could add on to the workforce issue, it is not going away. It's really just not, and there's no secret solution. But I will tell you that I've mentioned here at the group before we've been working regionally with an effort to help employers both attract and retain employees, and that's working with a local Portsmouth marketing company, so there's going to be some videos. It's more of an educational and awareness piece, and that'll at least give maybe smaller employers who wear many hats and may not have an HR department an opportunity to compete. But make no mistake, it's going to be a competition. There are employers that are going to figure it out. As an example, Jay Hospitality Group, last time I talked to Jay McSherry, he's like, I don't have a problem. I'm like, wow, would you like to share with others? Why? And he was hesitant, but all that to say, there are employers that are figuring it out and some that are not. So we want to help the smaller employers who may not have a full-blown HR recruiting arm to be as successful as they can. But I'll move into my update, as I know Jane will be here shortly. So just a quick update on the CRM efforts. We were able to, with the help of our DPW folks, I was able to get some business district overlay of the 3,000 businesses that we identified in the CRM. So we're able to put a location tag on them. I think I know what that means. And I've been harping enough with my contact at the company. He's looking at creating some standard reports so I can start to see the data and use it and as issues come up. So that's a process that's going to continue to move on, but I'll keep you posted on that. The second biggest issue on my desk is construction, and it is going well.
Why are you looking at me?
I'm not. It's going well in Commercial Alley. It's going well on Market Street, although if you missed the update, we're going to close it next week to vehicular traffic at night as well, because there was a development that requires that. So working with retailers, that's been a big piece to over-communicate. We're going to add some signage. We added some signage this week. It looks like we're going to add some more just to let everyone know that shops are open, and don't be discouraged by the construction barriers that you see. Ben mentioned the SBA event. We're going to have two panels, right? We're going to have three employers on the first panel and 3 employers with resources on the second panel. And I'll just say for this group, Ben, is it 8 to 8:30? Is that the networking piece?
That sounds right.
Right. So the idea is to have the networking piece before the event starts. So I would just encourage anybody who wants to be there. Mike Vladich will be there. He's a New England District SBA guy. He's on LinkedIn like every other day at an event. So he's everywhere, and I think it'd be good if you wanted to meet him and check in there. A reminder, the budget's being presented Monday night at 6 o'clock. If anybody wants to hear that, that's a great place to hear about it from the first blush. And I reached out to parking after last week's meeting regarding the report that this group used to get. I didn't get a quick response on that. What I did get was a whole bunch of data that I really wasn't able to boil down. So I would just say to this group, if anybody has a copy of that report or specifics on the data of the utilization you'd like to see, I didn't find anything in the hard drive that I inherited in my office.
It was a graph, I thought.
Was it pretty short and succinct?
Very short, and it just gave us, I thought, week to week, and it compared last year. It was.
Was it for garages or?
At that point, we only had the High Hanover.
Right.
And
Yeah, I think
it
was
may
garage.
have also given us some preliminary indication on what was happening at Foundry, but there was no comparison. There was no comparable metrics.
So is the interest in the garage usage or?
It was garage usage.
Okay, I think I can get that. There's a lot of data in the parking department if you haven't ever seen that.
This was all boiled down to just.
Yeah, I think closure and maybe percentage occupancy.
Yeah.
And I think closure
Yeah,
doesn't
days
seem
of
like it's been as relevant since, but
Right.
I think occupancy would be helpful to see at both now that they're fully
Yeah.
operating.
I mean, anecdotally, I think, as I mentioned last week, we're up year to year, but I will certainly ask for like a monthly recap usage, and certainly as we come into the busier season here in the summer
I
for
think
the
the thing that would be
garages.
helpful too is if we knew you'd have to net out those that have been taken out of usage for construction, so that then you can really.
Well, right, and at Foundry, you've got some that are you have your monthly customers, you have your downtown employee slots. So there's really it's not as there's some complexity to it, but I will work on getting that boiled down for our next meeting.
And I don't think we ever had a breakdown of that in High Hanover previously, maybe monthly
Yeah.
passes, but.
We did know monthly passes, so
Okay.
I think it'd be helpful just for the general public to know how that's, additionally, how the usage has been at the new Foundry.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's what I
Yep, that's great.
Questions?
Questions for Sean? We do have a McIntyre, if any, update. I know there's been a lot.
I can give a really short update because I want to be respectful of Jane's time. As you know, the council voted this past Monday night not to acquire the property. We relayed that to the GSA on Tuesday, and by close of business by close of business Wednesday, the GSA had up on their website a coming soon announcement that the property would be listed. It will be listed as 80 Daniel Street. It'll be on both their program homepage and on their online auction site. And they have pledged to keep us apprised of the process as it moves along. We will get notices, just as anyone else who might be interested, to follow the path of the program. And it is important to note that GSA is supportive and is appreciative of the fact that the city will continue to maintain the property for the purpose of utilizing it for monetizing parking. And we will be able to do that through the middle of October, which times with the end of outdoor dining, which is Indigenous Peoples' Day. So that is your update.
Thank you. Tom?
Is there a website, someplace where we can quickly go to check on this periodically, or do we have to
Sure,
search under
through Sean,
GSA?
we can share it with everybody.
That'd be great.
Thank you. And we've got city council here. Can we pause and come back to that after
Absolutely.
our guest has a chance to speak? Thank you. Welcome, Jane Farini. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning,
tonight.
everybody. Some of you are familiar, many of you are. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jane Farini, the Assistant City Attorney, and have been serving in that capacity for about a decade. And one of the roles that I play is the staff liaison for the Legislative Subcommittee. And that subcommittee is comprised of the mayor, the assistant mayor, and two counselors, Counselor Tabor and Counselor Cook. And what that committee does is it follows and tracks legislation on issues of interest to the city. A lot of times those are financial issues, things that the state does that are going to negatively impact the city's budget, and also other issues of interest that the city has deemed to be a priority. How do we do that? How does the city figure out what is going to be the issues of interest? So early, before the session gets active, the legislative committee meets, and we have adopted annually legislative principles that are sort of the guideposts that allow us to support or oppose particular bills as they come up quickly through the legislative session. And that was devised, I believe, former Councilor Chris Dwyer adopted that from the New Hampshire Municipal Association's policy of doing that, so that their members meet, they identify priorities, and then that allows those particular lobbyists to go and advocate on behalf of its members. Similarly, the council approves these legislative principles and then goes and tests and allows staff and the assistant mayor, who's been up quite a bit, and the mayor and other representatives of the city to oppose or support particular bills. So those are on the Legislative Subcommittee website. One of the big ones is local control. So as you all are aware, when the state tries to take away decision-making from local municipalities. That's something sort of on a broad brush basis that we oppose, because we obviously want to be able to maintain our autonomy on those things that we are allowed to by the legislature. Because as you know, we aren't a home rule state. Our local government can only do what we're authorized to do by the state, but then if they try to take some of that authority away, that's something that we usually pay close attention to. The other things that we try to look at are anything that sort of is a statewide zoning amendment. That's something that we pay attention to because typically zoning is a local, it's homegrown, right? Each town and city is very different. So therefore, no two zoning ordinances are exactly alike. Where this has been quite interesting is in the conversation of workforce housing, because sometimes there's a conflict between particular bills that are proposed that are incentivizing workforce housing, perhaps increasing density, saying every single-family residential home can now have 4 units in it. Well, that supports workforce housing, but yet it removes local control. So that's something that the committee can discuss and, present information. That bill actually ended up not having legs and not moving forward. But that's just an example as to the kinds of things the legislative subcommittee will talk about and address and move forward on. There are some great resources out there for everybody to check, and I am looking at someone who has become a great resource. The Public Policy Committee is very active in tracking legislation, and that is a wonderful resource for all of you. I'm sure Ben reports on that. The New Hampshire Municipal Association has a new bill tracking feature. So anyone can go on their website, and I can have that sent out through Sean, where not only can you can track sort of all the bills, but bills of interest to NHMA, but by topic. So that's a brand new feature. Talk about AI and automation and people getting put out of work. That's what I used to do, I used to frantically, spend hours and hours trying to track and update. But it's wonderful that you can actually sign up per topic or per bill through NHMA. So I wanted you all to be aware of that, and that's been very helpful to get the status of these bills. So now let's talk about what happened or what's happening this past session. This has been a very unusual session because of the close number in the House of Republicans and Democrats. Typically, one would be able to give testimony to a committee and be able to forecast what the committee's recommendation was going to be. A lot of times, it's along party lines. A lot of the committees were very evenly placed between Republicans and Democrats, and this year, a huge amount of bills went forward without recommendations from a committee. Why is that significant? Well, there are over 1,000 bills that come out in the beginning of the session. So you have volunteer legislators who are serving on committees who are trying to vet and process and read all of these bills that they have to vote on. So they usually know their committee, right? Election, municipal, or whatever. But there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that come for them, and they don't have staff. So this is pretty much on them. They have some staff, but so the party recommendation, from each party is something that a legislator would rely on recommendations on certain bills. But this whole session was very, very interesting because with a House so close, it's who showed up. But people are sick, they're not in, you count the numbers, when is the vote called and all of that. So it was very interesting. So you could typically go before a committee and kind of know that this strong recommendation of the committee is going to be followed, right? Well, so many bills came without recommendation, and then the factor in the House, obviously, of the close number made it really a jump ball. You couldn't predict, So that's just a historic antidote for why this was kind of a fun session. So what's happening now? Budget. Okay, just like the city, the state is working on its budget. So the governor comes out first with his budget. Then the House, it creates House Bill 1 and House Bill 2. House Bill 1 is actually the appropriation, the numbers for the budget. House Bill 2 is the one that changes like the wind. House Bill 2 are the policies and statutory changes that are required to implement the expenditures in House Bill 1. And House Bill 2 is hundreds of pages. And so this is the confusing part of the legislature, because you have all the debates on the budget. What made this year very interesting, too, is bills that are tabled. So you think, oh, I'm done, right? The committee is not going to address this, can be attached to House Bill 2. So that's happened in the House. I'll give you an example in a second. And it's hopefully happening in the Senate with a retirement bill that I'll talk about in a minute. So this is a hard time to, if you're tracking information, you've got to, sort of try to pay attention as to how these different iterations of the budget come forward. So the House has passed a version, and now it's in the Senate. So the Senate's now looking at it, tweaking it, and then ultimately by early June, the Senate has to be done. There has to be a budget that's agreed upon. A couple of issues in the budget that we're always interested in, as I say, because of financial issues, is sort of our sources of revenue. So meals and rooms, that's obviously something that many of you, I think, helped with the push to change and improve the distribution of the meals and rooms to cities and towns. Some of you pay the meals and rooms tax. As you know, in 21, that was reduced by 0.5%, so it's 8.5% now, but an increased amount to municipalities was also part of that change. And that's been a great source of income to the city because our tourism industry is very, very strong. And so the net revenue from meals and rooms has been able to come down throughout all the municipalities, and that has increased substantially over the last 2 years because of the change in the law. And that's, again, that was a legislative push. That was years and years and years. Particularly Portsmouth was vocal, as were many other, the NHMA and many other folks were instrumental in making the legislature comply with its statutory requirement to distribute the right amount. And why do I say push them to distribute the right amount? Because the legislature repealed a particular provision of a statute as to they were supposed to pay, they were supposed to distribute a particular percentage. Well, they either suspended or repealed it year in and year out and distributed less. But this new law is much better, and I think the legislature recognized, particularly during COVID, how impacted municipalities were. So that's something where it's an example of involvement in how water on a rock eventually, makes a change. So that one's important. One that we also have to watch very closely is retirement bills, because that is hugely impactful to cities and towns. Obviously, a huge portion of our budget is payment of retirement. So last year, we got a one-time payment for 7.5% for type 2 employees from the state. Originally, they were supposed to, under statute, were supposed to pay up to 30 or 35%, but over the years, it went from 35% to 0. So last year, we got the one-time payment. There's another bill, Senate Bill 114, that would do another 7.5% payment. However, that bill was tabled. So now it's whether or not the Senate is going to try to attach that bill to the House bill, and whether or not, if it's passed and incorporated into the budget, we will get that one-time distribution. I checked in with our folks at NHMA, and the word is that the Senate is really trying to cut the budget that that the House presented. So I'm not sure that the surplus funds will be used, and that particular bill will be attached by the Senate to House Bill 2. But again, that's one we watch very, very closely. It has huge fiscal impacts to the city. As do other bills that are also out there to pay the unfunded accrued liability of the retirement system. It's like, I don't even know. I think it's in the billions. And a lot of what we pay is paying that off. When the city's portion of the employees' payment for the employees' retirement, a lot of that is paying down that unfunded accrued liability. And there's a couple of bills that would take the surplus and pay off some of that, which would have an effect a couple of years down the road to the city, not immediately. So that's the kind of thing that we like to pay attention to. There were bills that we identified early in the session that we were tracking. One of them was, as many of you are familiar with, the hotel occupancy bill. A lot of you have been involved and testified and been aware of this bill that the city has been a champion on for many, many years. That was killed in the Senate. It didn't even make it out of committee. It was hightailed right away. And again, the water on the rock analogy, I'm going back to that. The reason the city pushes that is that as a tourism mecca, we have lots of infrastructure and costs associated with tourism that other cities and towns don't. We get the tax benefit of, the property that we own and all of that, but because Meals and Room is distributed by population, not by what you contribute to Meals and Rooms, the city doesn't receive, a huge amount in that net revenue distribution. So what are other sources of revenue, right? So the hotel occupancy was enabling legislation which would allow a town or city to say, we're going to pass this and we're going to impose this $2 a night, fee on cities and towns. It has been not met favorably by the legislature, and we keep trying, looking for creative ways for that income. The other bills that we also look at is anything that's going to affect sort of liability of board members or committee members, anything that's going to remove a city's immunity, that sort of thing. We are tracking House Bill 639, which is the cannabis legislation. And the last version of that, I believe, talks about distributions to the education for SWEPT and how, if we pass it, how is that money going to be distributed? And then, of course, the housing, issues of housing and workforce housing were very, very important this year. And I can say that, we are very supportive of the Senator Perkins Quokka's bill that was killed, unfortunately, that would have permitted cities and towns to require workforce housing for all development. and she worked with us, and she put that bill forward. I believe that bill was tabled. But again, that's one of those instances where we're only allowed to do what the state permits us to do, and we're not just allowed to require every development to have workforce housing. So we drafted a bill, for the legislature to pass to allow us to do that, and we were, we tried, but that one was not successful, but certainly will be brought back again and again. As you well know, Senator Perkins Quokka is a champion of housing and has been working really hard in Concord on all housing issues and putting forward a lot of bills on that and working very hard on behalf of the city. So that's just kind of a general chat about sort of what the legislative subcommittee does, where the budget process is, what happened to some of the bills that we were tracking. One of the things I would encourage is, through Sean certainly during your discussions, if you have certain issues of interest that you think the city should be aware of on a legislative basis, or you think there's certain bills that, should come forward, we work very closely with our delegates, and we work very closely with Senator Perkins Quokka, and she always has an ear for us, as she would for all of you if you see that there are legislative issues, not just through the city, but obviously as citizens, So we would encourage you to reach out, or if you have questions on stuff, you can always reach out to me. I try to keep up on things, and if I don't know the answer, I can try to find it out for you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Questions or comments?
Question just on the sort of pillow tax
Yes.
issue. What's been the big pushback? Has it been lobbying by the lodging industry mostly, or is it
I think so.
just,
I think
we don't like any taxes in our state?
I think it's both.
Philosophical kind of thing?
I think fundamentally, it's a philosophical thing. I think they're characterizing it as a tax, and they don't want to open that door, to let.
Because it seems like a sales tax kind of
Yeah,
thing.
and that I think is the fundamental premise as to why it doesn't pass. I do think 2-3 years ago, the hotel and restaurant industry worked very closely with Senator Muffville Clark, and we came much closer to something that I think the industry was supportive of, but that does not seem to be the case at present.
I find it an unfortunate reality that there's not enough discussion that we, as a state, we only have a regressive tax structure, and at some point it then, dwindles down to just property tax. And if that is I just had a meeting with Joan Hamlet, David Muse, and a couple of our other representatives, and there's the conversation on that, is that at some point we have to relook at our statewide tax structure and try to find alternatives means of revenue. Or else essentially we're going to price people out of their homes in the long term. But to comment to what Jane said about committees, when I went with Jane one day to testify about the Housing Championship Bill, I think there was 15 people in the committee, and there were 3 people in the room, and sometimes some of the questions you get back are make you wonder if certain people have read the bills. When we were talking about the inclusionary housing bill, one of the senators said, well, why have you guys not enacted an ordinance to do this? And I said, well, there is no legislation that allows us to do it, Senator. That is why I'm here testifying. I think verbatim I said that. So that is why we are here testifying, so that we can do this. But I do think that in our legislative process, testimony does matter. And so I recommend to everyone that if there is a topic that you feel is in the best interest of the city or yourself, to go to Concord. It is slightly tedious. I recommend getting there early so you can sign up and then leave. But I definitely recommend for everyone in this room and the people at home to go up and testify, because it does really make a difference, especially when there's 3 or 4 people who have shown up to committee. It does make a difference.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, I've observed it when I've just shown up and like handed in, you know, testimony on behalf of the city, written testimony, and although committee members are quite courteous, that does not have the impact that when, you know, an assistant mayor or a mayor or members of the chamber or people actually showing up makes a huge impression upon the committee. And again, I've observed it over many, many years, and it really is quite impactful.
Great. Tom?
Yes, Jane, I wonder if the pillow tax was presented as a local option, would that be better received? Or?
That's a great question. In fact, it was this past time, it was actually enabling legislation as a local option, and even that, there was resistance.
At one point, we were tracking this, and it seemed every session we got a little further votes. We picked up the Connecticut River Valley, and then we got
Yes,
Nashua.
exactly.
Has that progression stopped, or are we?
I think it's static. I don't. Yeah, I think we got I think we had support of more members of the community. I don't know that translated to their representatives supporting. And I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm just saying that just because I didn't, and whether those numbers were sufficiently large, right? We have 400 members of the House, so even if we captured and some of the bigger cities kind of came on board late, as you know, and you know the Lakes region, and they came on board, and yeah, so it is a challenge, but I didn't there was no incentive this time around for reasons I don't know, but you're right, there were years where there was a lot more support and cohesion, but again, I think it's that critical mass, the critical number, and just the philosophical pushback on the characterization of the fee.
We already have meals and rooms, so it seems like it's the same thing. And if that were equitable, then there wouldn't be an issue probably.
So I would offer up that industry already feels like they are being taxed. To add a second tax seems a bit punitive, if you will, you know. So, and that's the one issue, I think the one issue, that the chamber's policy goals differs from the city's a little bit, and we agree to disagree on that one. Because a lot of communities, particularly tourism communities, are looking for marketing dollars too, so that they can grow the occupancy and bring more people to town, and ultimately fill the rooms and meals tax bucket, if you will, a little bit more. So that it would be different, I think, if the entire community was speaking with one voice and the business community was aligned with the municipal community on this. But I don't think that's reality, at least anytime in the near future. So it's unfortunately, I don't think it'll go far.
I think we're only even talking about the pillar tax because they changed the original formula from the room and meals tax, and municipalities get a lot less money than they used to.
Well, that's changed back a little bit.
Yeah,
but
just
little,
very
but-
recently, yep. But yeah, I think that early on, historically, yes, I think that was a reaction, you know, to the fact that the state wasn't paying out what it was supposed to pay. They had I think it was like at 20%. Roughly.
And that may be a better path moving forward of focusing on that distribution, because I think there's some inequities there on, quite frankly, Portsmouth kicks a lot of money into that fund, and gets back a very small percentage of that back. So I think that might be a easier path forward to having some more revenues come into the municipalities than a new tax. So that's just my 2 cents.
So you've got Portsmouth versus
Right.
100 other little towns.
Yeah, that's the challenge. Is
Why
if
would they
you're
vote for it?
if you're Claremont or somebody like that, you know, they view it as those that have means getting more means than, you know, and them being further, you know, penalized or regressing. So it's very tricky. So.
And
I don't think we want to keep going.
Like Jane said, there are some, city leaders who say, oh, I think Manchester's a good example where their mayor has publicly said, like, we support this, and their legislators have voted against it.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's also a huge issue too, is that the people there don't always vote in line with what some of the people want. It is complex.
One final question. You didn't really discuss following the whole education of freedom accounts and that type of thing. And has the city taken a position on that? And
Not on the education freedom accounts, but we are a member of the Coalition Communities 2.0, and we do have a group of cities and towns, well, actually just towns, and we're the only city, that were the former donor towns historically for the SWEPT. And so we do have a lobbyist that tracks the SWEPT issue in the legislature, and the reason for that is the statute as currently written allows cities and town to retain the excess SWEPT. There are bills in the legislature over the last several years to have the city not be able to retain that excess SWEPT and pay it over into the Education Trust Fund. So there were 2 bills relative to that this session, and they were killed. So that particular issue did not move forward. And the coalition communities have a narrow scope of tracking on the SWEPT issue. The whole education freedom account, we have not taken any position on that. I do know in the budget there is some discussion of removing certain funds from the Education Trust Fund, putting it into the general fund. I know that there is money attributed to special ed that the governor put in, but the House took it out. I know there's modifications to the education funding formula, trying to target more disadvantaged communities through the existing formula. I'm also aware of the 2 lawsuits that are currently pending. That is what's really going to inform the legislature on this issue. The Conville matter, I think its last week of trial is this week. It's been a 3-week trial on the whole education funding formula. That will be quite impactful. I would be shocked if whatever happens doesn't get appealed to the Supreme Court again, because it's already gone once. So this is the remand. And then also there's Rand v. State, which is a second lawsuit that's pending that actually does attack that SWEPT issue that I have just described. So I think these cases will definitely impact legislation moving forward next session.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane.
Thanks, Jane.
Okay, so thought maybe before we get into our outdoor dining conversation, we would kick back to the assistant mayor for any council updates.
Yeah, I feel like this group stays pretty up to date with a lot of the council things. We are heading into budget season, and so that is the big undertaking that we will start on Monday. Monday is the first public hearing. The city manager and the mayor, well, the city manager and her staff, but the mayor rolled out the budget last week. We gave a guideline to stay roughly under 4%, which they are coming into. And so we will be having a couple public dialogue sessions too, which is something that this council started last year. So going out into the community. So we'll be at the middle school, at community campus, and at the senior center on the 18th.
On the 18th.
Look at that, on the 18th. There are different time slots from, I believe, 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to somewhere in there. They're listed on the city website. So we're really trying to get into the community. I would ask that any community members that want to have like a less formal conversation to please attend. We're really trying to hopefully get it out, hopefully potentially using our new flash vote service to get that information out there too to people, so that we can get. Last year was our first year doing it, and we didn't really have too much participation. But again, within the budget, we want to make sure there's a lot of participation. there's been casual conversation around and this will really affect our budget if this is something we as a community decide to go forward with, about a school resource officer at every school. Obviously, we know that, the epidemic of school shootings hit very close to our home, within the last month. We have one at the high school, have one at the middle school, but there's not one at the 3 elementary schools. So there's the conversation, I think, that will be brought up in the budget conversation of whether that should be individual, whether that we should have one that rotates through schools, whether we feel that it's a necessity, whether it needs to be an added position or can be enrolled in current positions. That, I think, will be a big conversation. What else? We got an update, obviously, on McIntyre, which has been a big, I think, saga in the community for much longer than I have been a counselor. But again, the council, I think, almost unanimously, we had one counselor who did not vote, felt that the number that the GSA assigned in their negotiated sale, which is pretty much a farce for a term because it's not negotiated, they kind of had a number and said, this is what you must offer us. And we felt that number was too high for the overall benefit for the city. So now, of course, it will go through their public auction. And I think that is kind of all that is of general interest. If there's any questions, please feel free to fire them my way. Yes.
So will the city bid at the public auction? Has that been decided yet?
That has not been decided. I think anything that would be decided of that, if the city manager can touch on that a little bit, anytime we decide to spend money that is not budgeted, we need to have a public hearing. When I think the issue really at auction is there, sealed bids, but we cannot make a sealed bid. I think, the city, when you look back at Foundry Place, that was a big issue that obviously we had to make public what any offer would be. You kind of drive up, you to a detriment can drive up the market because, again, we cannot make a private bid. So depending on, there has been no vote on that. There was definitely discussion on that, and there was a lot of discussion of whether during the negotiated sale we should or could offer a lower amount. But in reality, the GSA has been very firm that this was the number that they would recognize. And then we had a lot of conversations we know roughly how much it's going to cost to abate the property, the fit up of property, just because of obviously working through the several plans over the last 4 to 5 years. And so whether, that was, you could easily look at, 50, 60, 70 million dollars to turn that into just that kind of building to acquire the property. So I know myself and some other community members, council members felt that this has been I call it, as some people call it, the boondoggle 9, I call it the boondoggle 45. There's been a lot of councils that through the time of this progress have had different opinions of how to go forward in all of that. But, I stand firm by the decision that I think it was our time to walk away from trying to be a developer and see that kind of what we can do through that, though, through the land use and through planning. That is why we're kind of really within the pressure in general, too, especially with community feedback, aside from McIntyre, to really look at some of our zoning and ordinances and trying to make sure that just in general, I think there's this idea of lack of public benefit from a lot of private development. I think Nick Krakenau gave us a refresh of a great slideshow that kind of talked about some of the exchanges that have happened. I think that McNabb's connection from Pleasant to Penn Hollow, I think that's a great example. We also Nick also touched on the North Mill Pond, the river kind of walkway that will be developed there. And so that's kind of, again, for us, making sure that we're kind of cracking down on some of those CD4 and CD5 trade-offs.
Awesome update. Thank you very much. So I think next on our agenda, we had our outdoor dining topic again. So we touched on this briefly last month, but Sean was kind enough to circulate some materials, including the survey, again, that he had sent out in March, not the survey, but the report out that the former planning director had provided to was it the Chamber Collaborative or the council, as well as the original outdoor, I would say the sidewalk cafe policy from 2012 that I think has been ratified and maybe adopted and utilized as the backbone of what exists as outdoor dining today. So I think that sort of frames the discussion. So I thought today we might be able to talk as a group about some of the key elements in response to that material, and then decide if the next best step would be to have a working group established, sort of in the same vein that we took with the ordinance changes relative to the EDC. We can have a conversation about it. I think the assistant mayor had said that the Suzanne Woodland was going to be working on ordinance language, so I don't know that it would necessarily be the EDC's task to actually create that language, but really from a policy procedural standpoint, I think I would view our goal as trying to come out with recommendations for the council that would allow the council to adopt an ordinance to create something more formalized that gives the business community and restaurateurs some certainty as they're making these investments, and that it becomes something that isn't necessarily needing to be ratified on an annual basis, and that provides some flexibility on pricing. So I know I just sent some of this back out this morning, but Sean had circulated that in mid-April. But I know, Tom, you had asked for the original 2012
Which was in that
policy, which was in that package. So I think it's very interesting to see the thinking, and obviously there's been a pivot. But I guess I would open it to the group as a start, just for general comments, feedbacks, or thoughts. Ann?
I can sort of tee this off with some thoughts. We're moving into year 4. May 1, I think, started the season, and
Yes.
we're already seeing a little bit of action out there. So we have 4 years of, I'll think of it as like our new outdoor dining, though we have had it for a while. I think of 2020 as kind of a new category, and we've had 2 years of no permit fees, and now we're moving into our second year of permit fees. So, I'm interested in the numbers piece, looking at the number of spaces that we have taken offline each of these 4 years, and then looking at the revenue that the city has gotten in the permit fees, which is only last year and this year. But then also looking at how our parking numbers, both the number of cars that have parked and also the revenue that we've seen on parking. What's that look like over the 4 years? So this starts to give us a kind of an overview of what are the numbers looking like. And I know we know what our revenue, we can estimate this year's revenue on permit fees, but we don't know our parking yet for this year. So that's sort of a ball in the air on that. So it'd be interesting to see how those numbers are shifting around, which would help us understand the permit fees and how that is. And then looking at last year's permits versus this year's, I don't know what's in the queue this year. I know some people have dropped off. It would be interesting to see who's dropped off, why are they dropping off, are we charging too much, or what's happening between last year and this year. And then, another piece of this is the structure or the setup itself. So last year, we changed some rules. We made a height restriction kind of on the fly. I know the GOAT had to come in and basically with chainsaws and change theirs out because all of a sudden it didn't comply with what we had put in place. So when you look at those heights and why, and do we like that? Is that what should go forward? What about people who are building platforms, which we love platforms, but we don't love platforms when they have a step? So how does that work? I think this is all part of what we're going to be putting in as recommendations. What kind of barrier are we looking for the alcohol service? And then just the whole safety and accessibility. I'm always going to harp on the accessibility side, and we should have 100% of our setups having some compliance on accessibility, and we have not hit that yet. Every year, we have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 dining setups that go the whole season not actually being accessible, and it seems so easy to get that right. So that one has to go into place. So back to you suggesting a working group, I think there's some data we need to pull together here, and it does feel like a working group to me, and I don't think it's a giant task. I think we'll turn this around for June or July's meeting. I don't think this should languish here at the EDC for a long period of time.
I would fully agree with that, and to touch on a couple of your questions, comments on data. We had talked about next meeting having, so I think the application timeframe is now closed or will be closing soon, so we'll have good visibility into what the actual participation and fee collection is going to be for this year. And we thought as some report out on that to this full commission next month would be helpful. And then also to be disseminated by a working group if we move in that direction. As part of that,
Mr. Chairman, can I jump in?
Sure.
Sean and I spitballed a little bit about things that we thought belong here for discussion versus things that sort of will be the case no matter what. Obviously, accessibility is a no-brainer, and things like abutters, seeking approval of abutters.
No-brainer.
Things up for discussion, treatment, material, should we have mandate consistency or not? Traffic and circulation feels like a no-brainer, but I think it's something that should be ratified by this group. Fees is something that I think we would suggest perhaps taking off the table. They've been established for this year. They could be something that are on the purview of the fee committee, and that could be dictated in the ordinance. And you don't want to stick an actual fee in the ordinance, and every time you want to change the fee, you have to change the ordinance. So I think if there were a way to recognize the fees are the purview of the fee committee, baked into the ordinance somehow that takes the angst out of that whole part of the equation, but that's for discussion. And obviously areas where you would allow and not allow this, travelways, parking, loading zones, sidewalks. The one piece that I think will get memorialized in the ordinance is the administration of this, and maybe the EDC wants to weigh in, but there's a group of folks on our side from traffic, DPW, parking, fire, inspection, zoning enforcement, planning, a mini group of our technical advisory committee that make this stand up, and they're doing it right now. And I feel like the EDC could certainly give input and import to that, but I think that piece stays alone, and we can still handle the administration once we know exactly what the parameters of the ordinance dictate. So sorry to go on and on, but I'm just thinking about operationalizing this.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that happen that we are required to do, and whether it's safety and the guidelines and visibility, line of sight. So, again, I don't think we need to, in my opinion, we don't need to dig into all of that. What we need to do is, I think, be that voice for the business community, and again, a lot of this has been discussed. I hear what you're saying on revenue, and my listening to the city council is it's not going to be a mathematical formula, right? What I hear is everybody wants outdoor dining, citizens, restaurants, everybody who comes to Portsmouth. So
Perhaps non-restaurants too, we should put that.
right.
Businesses.
Yeah, businesses. So there's lost revenue, but there's revenue that comes back in other ways. So I don't know if that's my opinion.
It's an economic driver.
It is.
So I don't think you're looking to replace revenue, but I think you need to understand what the
trade-off.
balance
Right.
is.
Absolutely.
on that.
Absolutely.
But it's definitely, those permits are not replacing parking revenue.
No, they're not.
And I would say just anecdotally, when I've talked to a couple restaurants who have decided not to go, it wasn't necessarily due to fees or proposal of increased fees. It was that it just didn't fit their business demographic. I think TJ's is a good example that when I've talked to Casey and Beth, they just said, our demographic doesn't need to be outside. You know what I mean?
Staffing's an issue for a lot of them.
Staffing is an issue. I think, again, a lot of places have found ways to, in my term, hoodwink it. You kind of figure it out. But yeah, I think a lot of places that have decided not to do it again, it just didn't fit their business model. And once they had to pay, they were like, well, it wasn't a revenue driver for us. So
You feel like this year really starts to show what's real, what the city wants as a whole, as visitors, as
Absolutely.
To that end, a bit of an update, there are only 31 requests in the pipeline. Last year, we permitted something like 42 or 43.
Yeah.
And they all came in late, for the most part. The deadline was April 18th. They're still trickling in. There seems to be a different level of interest, and many are ready to go once they pay. And I bet lots of people are looking at the weather, so I think everyone's going to pay probably today and want to be open later today, and that's our angst a little bit. So different climate this year.
That's a quick clarifying question. The deadline, you just used the term deadline. Is it indeed a hard deadline, or if say, I don't know, a new restaurant opens up in July and they want to jump in or whatever have you, is there the ability, is it rolling or is it?
It is rolling. It's helpful for DPW to understand who needs a barrier. So that's really the driver of a deadline. And we wanted people to know that if you want to be open for May 1st, you've got to get your stuff in completely by April 18th so that we aren't inundated with trying to permit everybody. And so there was a hard stuff for getting stuff in if you had an expectation of opening early, but we will roll.
Thank you.
Everett?
I think you might have answered it. The ownership of the barriers, the city owns the Jersey barriers.
Jersey.
The city owns those blue Jersey barriers, by the way. We will paint the ones that are placed and look all scuffed up. That's already come up, and I know some of them look pretty beat up. There are some that are required to have those. There are lesser streets that may need one on each end, but a different treatment in the middle. But the city owns those blue ones.
In the planter boxes as well.
Correct.
And then, okay, good. And then the other part, my question would be is, as this has evolved, is do we want to make some of these bump outs permanent and not just be dining in the street? And I think that, and I know that's a concern for DPW and others, but some of the narrow streets just don't allow themselves to be, conducive to outdoor dining, and people are having to walk around in the street. Some of it looks ragtag, and I think we're 4 years into this. We owe it to the city, we owe it to each other to have a better product, I think. And I've heard over and over again, what is the public benefit to closing streets to one-way traffic for a restaurant or two? What's the public benefit? And and what's the benefit to the store owner? What's the benefit to people that don't come downtown? And that yet they come down once in a while and they have to work the way around because some, a restaurant got a permit to have outdoor dining and now we close the street. I think that's unfair.
I don't think we're doing that, are we?
Well, we just did, but we didn't for 3 years. We allowed streets to be blocked. And,
Right.
And so and I know we had the comment around Fleet Street. Should we be doing? Should we bump that out? So I just think more of a permanent solution. And I realize we're doing some of that, but also incorporating, are we going to bump the sidewalks out in places to allow this to be more permanent and to look, more uniform?
If I can speak to the bump out of sidewalks piece, that will be part of the master plan for Market Square once we re-envision the square, and that will not only apply to Market, Congress, Pleasant, but the immediate side streets. And I think per my comment earlier about traffic and circulation, we'll make sure the ordinance speaks to this will memorialize no reversing or detouring on one, smaller streets, and for the purpose of accommodating this.
Yeah, my thought on that, Everett, would be the ordinance could be crafted based on what we know today, and if sidewalks are expanded in the future, that could be incorporated as sidewalk space, and it's whether parking space may or may not be used or sought as part of it, depending on where the restaurant might be. But I think flexibility would probably be a key part of that.
I think, Everett, to your point about expanding sidewalks, we're kind of at this phase of a community where we're transitioning our downtown from a vehicle, automobile, drive in front of the store, park in front of the store, to a drive and park in the garage or park, nearby, and to a pedestrian-oriented and pedestrian-focused and a walkability downtown core, and that's going to take a generation to change all these streets to wider sidewalks and things like that. So I think certainly Market Square and Fleet Street will be early adopters of that, and that'll set the tone for the rest of the downtown, but that's going to take a long time.
Fair.
I would agree with you, because even walking downtown without anything on the sidewalk, on a busy Saturday,
Right.
you can only fit 3 people on the total sidewalk, even in some of our wider sidewalks.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I know that has been, Councillor Cook asked to expand the purview of the, of the scope of kind of when we're looking at the Market Square redesign, to bring it out more. So we're not just focused on the conjunction of those 3 kind of merger streets, that we're looking at all the way potentially over to Bridge Street, and really also, again, I think our downtown is, and the core focus is not just that intersection. It really has, as Ben has said, has clearly spread. You're starting to see bigger businesses kind of merger over out to the west end.
Mr. Chairman, we are getting hairy eyeballs from the Land Use Committee trying to get in this room. So.
Okay, great. I think so. So my desire would be to establish a working group. I know I've heard from a couple folks who would be interested. So for anyone else interested, feel free to let me know now or via email.
I'm interested if I'm allowed.
You can include me. No, there's-
So everyone.
I think that's a full group. We might need to pare that down a little bit.
I think it's probably the whole committee.
Yeah.
That's my guess. It's probably a big enough issue. that
Yeah, and
it
separate
warrants
from
everybody.
our dedicated meeting. Okay. Great. We'll work on scheduling something to get together again for that. Thank you, guys. So I think that group will probably focus on, to the discussion this morning, fees, or codifying where those will be decisioned, structure, setup, composition, and then uniformity. And we can keep that moving forward from there. Any other business within the committee before we open it up to public comment? Nothing? I have one other comment. I know there's a couple of conflicts for the June 2nd date, so I propose our next meeting be on June 9th, which is the second Friday next month.
I have a housing conference,
Housing conference. Okay.
but I can go late to that.
Okay. Any other big conflicts?
I think so.
Great.
There's a Historic Archives meeting at this time in
In
this
this-
room
Okay.
on the 9th, so you'd have to work with Vince on that and sort it out.
Okay. Sean and I will work on that. Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak for public comment? We have Mr. Choate here today for first time in a few months. Welcome.
Thanks. I'll try to keep this quick because I know you want to get going. It has been a couple of months, and I was flattered a couple of you came up to me and said, oh, it's good to see you back. But I don't know if that's unanimous feeling. I want to throw out a couple of ideas in terms of zoning that I think the city should be looking at. I've mentioned these in the past. They're really, one of them is related to housing, one's not. I think that the city should look at the area between Ocean Road south to the Rye Line for rezoning to allow more industrial uses. And as Bob and Andy can tell you, the huge issue we have in southern New Hampshire is a lack of any industrial inventory, and that's really a job driver. And I think some of those properties are grossly underutilized and underzoned. So I just urge the city to look at that and see what properties might be. I think a lot of them, I don't know how far the gateway zone goes down, but I don't think that you could do a traditional industrial use there. And again, I might be wrong, and there might be a couple of different zones on there, but if you think of it, Ocean Road South is less developed than Ocean Road North. So that's one idea I had. The other thing is an idea I've thrown out many times as a way to maybe address some of the workforce housing, and I don't know whether this is an ongoing discussion or not, but have somebody look at the industrial properties and see if there's any excess land whereby workforce housing associated with that business or the business that occupies the building could be an accessory use. So if I'm a manufacturer and I have an extra piece of land, could I put up a 4-unit building? Or, I used the Water Country example, but they never built it, but they got approval for a dormitory. It could be restricted to people that are associated with that business, so it's not like, it would have to obviously have the criteria being workforce rates and not. So I think it's something we should look at is creative solutions. You're not going to find any traditional solutions in Portsmouth because land is too valuable.
Yeah.
And there's no way, as Joanna and Jane have said, to really mandate people to do workforce housing. They're going to find some excuse not to do it. There was some discussion about employees, and it's interesting what's happening in the marketplace right now. We're hearing less about hiring concerns than we used to, but the issue of what's going to happen to all this office space, and again, most of it's at P's, granted, versus employees coming back is such an open question. I think, frankly, the worst is yet to come. What's happening is a lot of leases that were renewed just before the pandemic or during the pandemic are coming due, and there's definitely some chatter in the industry about banks starting to take back buildings. I don't know whether the bankers in the room are starting to see that, but whether that's going to happen in Portsmouth, I have no idea. But again, it's just, I think creatively, it's difficult. They don't know. If I have 80,000 square feet today, do I need 40,000 in 5 years, or do I need 100,000 square feet? I don't know. Anyway, it's the big conundrum in the office right now. The other thing that occurred to me as Jane was talking is New Hampshire Association of Realtors, of which Andy and Bob and I are all members, has been the #1 lobbying effort for workforce housing in New Hampshire, and has been successful in getting a lot of stuff not ITL'd, which is inexpedient to legislate. Jane mentioned, I think Senator Perkins' Quokka's bill is tabled. That's actually a good thing, because it means it can be brought up again. Inexpedient to legislate means it's gone to purgatory and it'll never, won't come back to the next session. So I can assure you that, and Ben knows this, being on the Public Policy Committee with me from the Chamber, that NHAR is definitely in lockstep with towns on that. The one area that we're having difficulty in, finding people is the trades. And I know there's an effort now to bring back the trades. So I don't know what anybody can do about it except talk to your friends who have kids and say, look, not everybody has to go to a 4-year Ivy League school. It's okay to go to community college and become a plumber or an HVAC technician, because you know what? They're going to earn twice as much as the person that has a history major. Peter Cryans, who's selling his business, he's retiring, but one of the reasons he's selling his business, Cryans Plumbing and Heating on West Road, and I met with him yesterday, he said, I needed 12 plumbers to be successful in this business. I can only find 6. And he said the people that I had that, once I announced I was retiring, they had offers from competitors that were unbelievable in terms of salary and benefits. So I don't know what we can do about it, but it's important. Yeah, the only other comment, and this is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, Andy and I have been involved in a few GSA searches and auctions. You do not want to be involved in the process. They have no clue what they're doing. It'll be a total cluster, I can assure you. So good luck with that one. But
Where were you at public comment the other night?
I don't know, probably responding to one of their latest,
Proposals.
one of the latest go around in circles proposal. It's a little different on the auction, but I just want to, if people think this is going to be a nice, clean auction like Paul McGinnis runs or something, you're sadly mistaken. There's too many layers of bureaucracy. Karen's already seen it
Mr.
for
Chairman,
the last several years.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anyways, that would basically it. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And Sean, if you wanted us to come back and do another market update sometime this year,
Yeah, we would
just
love
let
that.
us know.
We'll let you know.
Thank you for your indulgence.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Appreciate it, everyone. Entertain a motion to adjourn. Welcome, our.
So moved.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. Have a great